Theories of Creation, Talk 7. This talk is about the theory of scientific creationism and the young Earth theory. Usually, the belief in 6 literal days creation goes hand in hand with scientific creationism, and that the universe and everything in it is relatively young. It's believed that the initial creation of all matter, described in Genesis 1:1, occurred sometime between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago, depending upon individual interpretations of the genealogies in Genesis. And so we'll go through the 6 days one by one. And so on day 1, the light which appeared on day 1, and I quote Henry Morris here, obviously did not come from the sun, moon and stars, since God did not make them and place them in the heavens until the 4th day. That's in Scientific Creationism by Henry Morris. And it's therefore alternatively suggested by him that these light waves traversing space from the heavenly bodies to the earth were energized even before the heavenly bodies themselves, in order to provide the light for the first 3 days. It was certainly no more difficult for God to form the light waves than the light bearers, which would be established to serve as future generators of those waves. Morris further suggests that for practical purposes, the primeval light must essentially have come from the same direction as it would later when the permanent light sources were set in place. This explanation is necessary because verse 5 tells us that there was day and night from day 1 onwards, which implies that the earth was rotating with a light shining upon it from a certain direction to provide the day and consequently the night. And then day 2. On day 2, Genesis 1 verses 6 to 8 tells us God made an expanse between the waters to separate water from water. The expanse was called sky. This description gave rise to the Canopy Theory, by which it was believed by some that a vast blanket of invisible water vapour enveloped the earth, and then this collapsed at the flood in the time of Noah, providing some of the water, along with the breaking up of the fountains of the great deep, mentioned in Genesis 7, verse 11. This theory has, however, recently been rejected by some of those who hold the 6 literal days creation view due to its scientific impossibility. For example, see In the Beginning by Walt Brown. And then day 3. On this day, the dry land and vegetation were formed. It's believed that each separate type of plant was individually created, and not that some evolved out of others. And then day 4. The sun, moon and stars were created on the 4th day, but as has already been suggested, the light from them was created 3 days earlier. In addition to separating light from darkness and giving light to earth, these bodies were also given the function of serving as signs to mark seasons and days and years. And then day 5. On this day, the birds and sea creatures were made. As has already been pointed out, the word for creature here is nephesh in Hebrew, and this is the first occurrence of this word. It's believed that on this day, God first created conscious life forms, as compared with inorganic matter or unconscious organic life forms, such as plants. Again, it's believed that each separate type of animal was individually created, and not that some evolved out of others. On the other hand, in common with those who hold to progressive creation, it is believed that microevolution does and has taken place. As previously explained, this involves potential variety within separate species, so that it is possible to produce many different breeds of dog, but not for dogs to evolve into different species. And similarly, there's many different races of humans, but they will never evolve into different species. And then day 6. Lastly, God created land animals, and then Adam, and then Eve. Man was created in the image of God, unlike any of the animals, and in this respect he was totally different. Consequently, hominid fossil bones discovered by scientists are believed to be either fully ape or fully human. The deduction that there was a gradual appearance of more and more human-like creatures is totally rejected, and obviously the dating of such bones at many thousands of years old is also totally rejected. This is explained by the idea of God creating an appearance of age. The view of a literal six-day creation between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago necessarily involves this idea of the appearance of age. On this idea, Henry Morris says this: "The creation was mature from its birth. It did not have to grow or develop from simple beginnings. God formed it full grown in every respect, including even Adam and Eve as mature individuals when they were first formed. The whole universe had an appearance of age right from the start. It could not have been otherwise for true creation to have taken place." This idea of appearance of age therefore disposes of any problems arising when scientific data seems to indicate that the Earth, the solar system, and the universe are very old in terms of billions of years. This idea was first proposed by Gauss in 1857 when he published something called Omphalos, an attempt to untie the geological knot. As a scientist, he was convinced by the physical evidence that the Earth was old, but as a preacher he felt constrained to believe that the Earth was young, in accordance with his understanding of the Bible, and more particularly Genesis. To solve the problem, he introduced the idea of the appearance of age. For example, he believed God created trees with annual rings for non-existent years, and that Adam had a navel, even though it would never have had a purpose. Today, his ideas have been modified, however, and Henry Morris writes, "This concept does not in any way suggest that fossils were created in the rocks, nor were any other evidences of death or decay so created. This would be the creation not of an appearance of age, but of an appearance of evil, and would be contrary to God's nature." In order to solve the problem of the fossils in the rocks, a geological alternative to the generally accepted scientific view, which is that of the layers being laid down gradually over many millions of years, was developed. This alternative is sometimes referred to as flood geology, and explains that all the geological layers of the rocks, together with their fossils, were laid down by the worldwide flood in Noah's day, and that they are not millions of years old at all. This view is a very old one, and it dates back to when the first discoveries of fossils were being made. It was formalised by George Macready Price in many books that were written by him on the general theme of flood geology, one important one being Evolutionary Geology and the New Catastrophism in 1926. That view was later popularised in the Genesis flood in 1961 by John Whitcomb and Henry Morris, and these ideas were further updated by other creation scientists, notably by Walt Brown in The Beginning in 1995. The whole theory of flood geology is a very complex one, and it provides an interesting alternative to standard geology. The books mentioned above and others explain all the technical and scientific details involved. This alternative flood geology theory is not only important because it provides an answer as to where the geological layers and fossils came from, but also because it does away with the idea that anything could have died before Adam sinned. As already mentioned, when Genesis 1 verse 31 says, "God saw all that he had made, and it was very good," it is believed that this excludes any possibility of there having been any death or disease or disaster before this point in time. As such, there could have been no fossils in existence before then, and they must therefore have been produced at a later period of time, that is, at the flood. And further, it's believed that Romans 5 verse 12 teaches that death came into the world only as a result of man's sin, and that therefore no death took place before Adam sinned, whether animal or man. It was only after Adam sinned that any death, disease or disaster took place. In the next talk, we're going to look at the advantages and the disadvantages of this scientific creationism and the young Earth view.